This is just gonna be a video on reading activities. So we're gonna start with Mi Lápiz. You put students in pairs or you put them in groups, and each student has a piece of paper or a handout. I usually just do like a handout of sentences on one, like, so if this is my paper, on one side I'll put sentences in Spanish, on the other side I'll just do lines for them. And that's really the easiest way for me to do this with a reading assignment, is I'll just put lines straight from the reading for them, and their task is to translate them. Okay, and you can do this with, I mean, you can literally play Mi Lápiz with a worksheet. It's fantastic. But, so you have your students in pairs or in small groups. I prefer pairs. And they all of the students have a piece of paper, but there is one pencil per pair or one pencil per group, and it just starts in the middle. And I always tell them, you're not even writing your name. You can't even write your name. Okay? Pencil starts in the middle of the two of you, and they have a die. Okay? And they roll the die. And on a 6, they can steal the pencil and start writing. And then their partner is rolling, and they're trying to roll a 6 or a seis. And when they roll a 6, they yell, Mi Lápiz! And they take the pencil and then they write. And their partner is rolling, furiously trying to get a 6, and they can steal the pencil and they write. And the goal is to be the first person in the pair or the first person in the group to complete the sheet correctly. And I'll come over and I'll check and I'll be like, And depending on the kid, depending on the error, depending, if there's something wrong, I tell them to sit back down and they go right back to stealing the pencil until one of the partners is correct. Variations, because sometimes it's kind of fun to vary this up. So I already mentioned that you could do this in pairs or in small groups. I let them steal if they catch an error too. Oh, I like that variation. She says, I let them steal if they catch an error. That's a good one. I like to do different numbers. So I already said, right, seis is when they can steal. Some people do, like, if you roll a trace, you can steal it, but you have to write with your non-dominant hand. You thought their handwriting was messy before? You just wait. It gets so much worse. Sometimes I do 5s. You have to do it, like, you have to write standing. I don't always do that because half the time when they play this game, they stand up anyways because they're like, I don't know what it is about standing. They're just like more ready. Last tip I have for this game, I couldn't find them. I looked. My classroom stuff is like shoved pretty deeply into a cabinet. I was hoping I could find them, but I couldn't. I like to keep my dice in, like, they're these teeny tiny rectangular, they're probably like a rectangular prism, or like little cubes. They're the dressing containers you can buy from the dollar store where they're clear on the bottom and there's just a Tupperware lid on top. I like to have them roll their dice in there because then as they're shaking it, they just tip it over and it doesn't go everywhere. That was Mi Lápiz. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of Tabata Timeline, but it's another one that involves a lot of motion, which, you know, is a win. So here's how you do it. You give your students a reading, or you project it on the board somewhere that they can see it, and you tell them, I want you to write X number of events from the reading. Okay, so they write 9 events that happened in their boxes, all from the reading that they had access to, because this is a reading activity, right? So I want them to be focusing on rereading and writing, not the output, okay? So once they have all of their events written down in their boxes, they flip over the piece of paper. So box. Flip over the piece of paper. Is there stuff written on this side? There is. And they write their names on the boxes on the reverse side of the paper. Trust me, have them write their names on it. They get scissors and they cut them out. So now every kid has 9 little boxes on their desk with their names on one side and with an event on the other. Here's where the Tabata part comes in. Here's where the timeline part comes in. The Tabata timer is the kind of workouts where you, like, it beeps and you're like, go, and you have to, like, work out as hard as you can for that amount of time, and then it beeps and you're like, that's the rest, right? So Tabata is set amount of time for work and set amount of time for rest. So when I do a Tabata activity with my students, they have a set amount of time to do the work, and then the rest time is what I use for, like, a reset and a rotate activity. So the work in this activity is to put those events in order. So they go to a different student's desk, the timer goes beep, and they read the events, they're referencing the reading on the screen, placing them in order, and they want a timeline of events. And then the timer's gonna go beep, and that's when I say, like, reset, and they scramble up the events again and they rotate to a different student's desk. So as they are rotating, sometimes I'll reduce the amount of time they have to work because they get better. They get faster. They know the story better. So as you're watching your students, you'll see them looking up at the reading less, and they're just reading the events and they know the story in their head because they've reread it so much. It's so good for them. All right, let's talk about some of the variations. You can have them write the events in Spanish, and you can have them write the events in English. Those are both perfect variations. It doesn't matter. I prefer to do Spanish because I want them to be rereading the structures in Spanish over and over again. And I find that they think less about rereading and more about just like glancing over and placing. Oh, the other big variation that you can do with this is where it gets really fun, is say you had their grid of 9 cards. Maybe you have some space down here. You have them do 3 events that are false, that didn't happen in the story. Okay, so now as they're rotating around, they have to identify, did this thing happen or not, and then put them in order. And I have a full, longer video on how to do that with all variations, a bunch of different ideas, a whole blog post. I have templates for you to use. I freaking love this activity, and like they like sweat when they're done because they're like putting them in order, and then they're running to the next desk, and they're putting them in order, and they're putting. I'm like, let's go. All right. That was Tabata Timeline. So we're on our last one, is running dictation, and running dictation is so fun. Like if you thought Tabata Timeline was like gym class because they're moving, running dictation is awesome for that. You need a reading to get started with, and with running dictation, I like to pull out anywhere between 9 to 12 sentences. I don't like to do more than 12. It gets to be a lot, and I want the sentences to be pretty short, and I actually have an example here for you. But you take your 9 or 12 sentences out, and you're going to put them on strips of paper. So they're big font and a big letter on top, okay? And the sentences are short. This is an example of something I would do with novices. I think you can probably tell that from looking at it. I don't know if you can read it backwards, but that's okay. But you can see, right? Big font, big letter, not a huge long sentence. The longest sentence that I might do would maybe be like double this one. I might do 8-word sentences. It kind of depends on, like this is something I would do at the very beginning of the year. Once they get into the year and they're a little bit stronger at language chunks, they can handle a little bit longer, but you don't want to make them too long because then the running part is hard. Well, I like to do running dictation in pairs. I know some people like to do it in groups of 3 or groups of 4. I like to just do pairs. And this is the sheet that I give to students as they're playing. So one student, one of their partners is the runner and one is the writer. The student who is the runner runs out to where you have hung these sentences. I cut them apart. I just printed this. You cut them apart and you hang them somewhere. I like to hang them outside of the classroom if I can, mostly because the past, 4 or 5 years, I had been a traveling teacher, so I had 2 or 3 classrooms. So whenever I did something that was like this, I would put it in the hallway between where my classrooms were, and then my students would run out to the hallway, look, come back in, go talk to their person. Okay, so you have a runner and a writer. You have your sentences. The sentences are hung up somewhere. If you are doing this in your classroom, you're going to want to make these a lot smaller, okay? Or you're going to want to like hang them this way and make them flip them over or something, because otherwise they'll just look from their desk. So just, consider that. So the student who is the runner will run out into the hallway and they'll read the sentence, "Ay, una chica," okay? "Ay, una chica, ay, una chica, ay, una chica, ay, una chica." Usually they're like whispering it to themselves as they're coming back to their partner, and they'll come back to their partner and they'll say, okay, ay, una chica, and their partner is writing, okay? So this is why I have, hopefully you can see, this is why I have letters up here and letters down here, is because my boxes, there's an A here for them to write the sentence. We'll do something with this later. So I always tell them, write right where the letter is, okay? And then the person who is running, once their writer has it down and the writer has got it good, and then runner looks at it and the runner's like, "Yep, that's what I read. It looks the same." Then the runner goes back out to the hallway and they can find whatever letter they want. I don't care what letter they do. They just have to do half. So say they find C next. They go find C. Abby está in Ohio. Okay, Abby está in Ohio. Abby está in Ohio. Abby está in Ohio. Go back to their writer. Okay, C, or say, right? Abby está in Ohio. And sometimes they're like, no, accent, because I tell them it has to be perfect. And sometimes that means 18 trips back and forth out into the hallway. And they're like, Abby está in, Abby está. And they're like, crap, where was Abby? And they'll go back. And they're like, oh, I can't remember where she was. So this is why shorter sentences are nice for them, because it's not too crazy long for them to remember. But like I said, as you get further into the school year, they get better at remembering longer chunks, and you can kind of stretch the sentences a little bit. Also, if they're familiar with the reading, if you've been doing stuff with the same reading over and over again, chances are they're going to remember that Abby's in Ohio. Stuff like that. Okay, so this is an odd number of sentences for this sheet. Sometimes I do 12, sometimes I do 9, whatever. I just tell them when they get about halfway through, they switch. So the person who was running is now the writer. The person who was writing is now the runner. And the only time I don't do that is if I have a kid on crutches. And then they have an alternative activity usually. Or they just tell me that they want to deal with it. And, it's up to the kid, whatever. Okay, so they switch. Then it says down here, it says, finish, check your sentences for accuracy. Once you are sure that your sentences are perfect, then they have to come check them with me. And I use a colored marker or a colored something, and I'll circle any sentences that have problems. And if a sentence has problems, the person who was the runner for that sentence goes back out. The person who was writer goes back to being a writer, and they go back out into the hallway, or they go back running and they reread, and they're like, what is wrong with C? What is wrong with C? And then they're like, oh, there's one of those little line thingies on that word. Accents, because I want them to reread and I want them to be paying attention to detail for this kind of thing. Okay, because they're just copying the sentence, right? It's not output coming from them. Okay. So anyways, then they come back to me, and I'm easily able to see like, oh, A and E and I were circled. Then I'll just give them a check mark with my nice colored marker, so it's easy for me to see like, yep, perfect. Okay. Then once their sentences have all been approved because they're perfect, they're going to take a scissors and they're going to cut it out. And I have them cut it out so like they have C and this box on top together. So they have one like taller box. And then they split them up. So, you have half of them and I have half of them. And they illustrate each box. Okay, so they illustrate each sentence in the box above it. And then we keep them. Okay, so I usually, like I mentioned with Tabata Timeline, I'll have them write their names on the back. So that way when they cut out the squares, they don't lose them. And we will use those illustrations and we'll use these sentences in other reading activities later. I have blog posts on all 3 of these that are a lot more in-depth and have a lot more examples and a lot more, right? There's tons of different variations you can do with each of these, so I have those all written out. I have templates for running dictation, so if you like how this is set up, I have a template that's editable for you in my TPT that you could grab if you want. Or same thing with Tabata Timeline. I have a template for it. If you're like, oh, I like how she was describing how she set it up, go for it. Take that. I have that for you because I really like these. So if that's easier for you, I will put the links to the longer explanations for each of those in the description. I will talk to you later. Have a wonderful, is it Friday? It's summertime. That's all that matters. I hope you have a wonderful, restful day and you do something to relax and enjoy yourself. All right, friends. Hasta luego.